Okay, Fat Tony's podcast episode 2. Let's see if we can recapture the magic. Welcome, everyone, to the Fat Tony's podcast. This is the show where we spend 1 hour, once a month, talking to a real-world expert in order to help us understand and navigate modernity. Our guest today is Shay Hill. Shay is an industrial safety and compliance expert and also the founder of FoundationSafety.com. This is a skills-based incident prevention consultancy. Shay is a man of many talents, most recently having released his new book, Make Rules Without Making Enemies, How to Draw the Lines Without Drawing Fire. It was an absolute pleasure talking with Shay, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. If you're interested in reading more of Shay's work, his blog is at shayallenhill.com.
Shay Hill, welcome to Fat Tony's.
Thank you.
It's really, really good to have you here, Shay. I know we've known each other for a couple of years now on various platforms, and I call you the most interesting man in the world. And I don't want to overhype this podcast before we even begin, but for people who don't know you, don't know your background, could you just give in your own words your story, where you're from?
I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm a safety consultant and god-awful at nutshells. Isn't that what they call this? Where you introduce yourself in the elevator pitch?
I think I remember reading on one of your blog posts that you were talking about not necessarily cold introductions like this, but when you're in a training seminar, there's always that cliche thing of going around the room and everyone has to introduce themselves. And you had a method or technique for doing that. And I think, was it something like finishing on a quote or finishing on, well, as my mum always used to say, X, Y, Z?
There's two pieces of that. So the first one is, yes, you have a parachute, something to say at the end. And it's like my daddy always said. And the other one is if you have a list, you think about your list before you start talking. And usually you won't get very far because you'll be listening to other things. But whatever the first thing that comes to your mind is, you put that at the end. So if someone says you have this prompt question, who you are, how long have you been with the company, what do you like to do with your free time? You're thinking, okay, well, with my free time, I like to spend time with my family. I like to ride my bicycles. I like computer programming. And then you start wandering off into this, come into bluegrass music a little bit. Not too much, but I do like it. And, direct to video action movies or so. So you have this thing going on in your head and you don't want to do that when they come to you. So what you do is you just take that first thing and you say, oh, my name is Shay. I've been with the company for 10 years. I like to ride my bicycle. I like computer programming. But most of all, I like spending time with my family on the weekends. And like my daddy always said, and if you want to go that, then you have it. So you have this thing to say, you have your parachute and then you have your thing that you put on the list last.
I love that. It almost has a Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people vibe about it. That's so cool. I think, that's a nice segue really into your book. You've recently written the book, Make Rules Without Making Enemies, How to Draw the Lines Without Drawing Fire. Now, I've spent a couple of weeks digging into this. I absolutely love this book. I've got some thoughts on it, but before I go off on one, I'd love to hear about what motivated you to write this book. And again, I, don't want to prompt you on the cold start again, but the story behind it, how it came to be.
Well, the story is all in the dedication, which is really short. It's just a couple of sentences, but it's true. I am one of the few people in the sort of modern blue collar industry landscape, one of the few left who has started at the bottom and then progressed far enough in a career that I have an opportunity to share my feelings and experience and culture of what it is like to be on the other end. And for a while, my job was to go out to facilities, audit them, inspect them, stick my nose into things. And of course, since I'd written a lot of the standards that we worked to, I knew them better than anyone else. And I could go forward and say, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Okay, this isn't really nice. And I do it in a very diplomatic way. But the people I was speaking to got frustrated because they'd worked very hard. They knew that I was coming and they'd worked very hard and they wanted to really pass with flying colors. And they were really enthusiastic about what they were doing and they're stand-up people and they just want to succeed. And they would tell me the same thing over and over. Why don't you just tell us what you want and we'll do it? Don't give us 500 things not to do. Don't give us a standard. Don't give us something else to read. Tell us what you want us to do. And we're just going to go right down here. We're going to do them all. And you're going to come here next time. And it's going to be 100%. We're not going to deal with any fallout. We're not going to deal with what report you're going to get back to the office. It won't be a thought and everyone will be happy. So I've had all the years since then of hearing that so many times to try to figure out why we don't do that. Because from one perspective, they say, well, we did tell you what to do. We told you exactly what to do. Here is 400,000 words on what you're supposed to do. Now, the fact that you didn't do it, that's on you, right? But it's all abstract. It's all, everything is easy until you sit down and try to do it yourself. And that's true when people write management systems. So you basically have a safety culture in companies that tries to use social engineering to build everything. You know, if we motivate you, incentivize you, frighten you, shame you, and otherwise manage you the right way, then all the little worker bees are going to self-organize into this perfect thing, this perfect system. In this case, a system being a set of instructions. But the problem is that all of those people do the things, they all contribute, they all work very hard too, but they all contribute the things that they want to contribute. And what most people want to contribute is some form of social engineering. So everything that doesn't get contributed, everything that falls through those cracks, all lands on the last person in the chain of command. And you want me to give you, an example? The CEO is looking around. The CEO looks at hand injuries for the quarter, says hand injuries are terrible. We need to really focus on reducing hand injuries, which is a reasonable thing for a person with that large of an umbrella to say. The CEO is basically saying, somebody do something about this shit. Somebody fix this. So then he says that to the C-suite, and the C-suite goes out to the VPs or the directors or whoever is underneath that in the organization. They say, we really need to focus on reducing hand injuries. And the CEO or the VPs or the directors might tell a senior manager, and the senior manager tells the area manager tells the site manager, and the site manager tells the crew supervisor, we really need to focus on reducing hand injuries. The crew supervisor tells the workers, we really need to focus on reducing hand injuries. And the worker looks over to his left, has no one to say it to, right? And it just lands. And they go, people try. We do the best we can. But, it's always that guy or person with a hammer in their hand who has to land the plane. It is exactly like being a programmer. People will tell you what they want. And sometimes the ideas and the requests are really abstract, but you've got to make it work. You have no choice. And how long have you been programming, Sebastian?
Myself, since I was a young teenager, but professionally, probably 12 or 13 years now.
We'll call it 12 or 13 years. And if I ask you how long does it take to write a function, that's how long is a piece of string? Because you only you know how hard what I'm asking you to do is.
Yeah.
So they go out and they do their best. And then, later on, they might get their chance. We have post-job debriefs and after action reviews when something happens, employee meetings. And the really savvy workers get up there and they say, well, we did a great job. I'm really proud of what we did, but somebody somewhere, or we need to focus on hand injuries. So I've been in a meeting where we're sitting in an office listening to a conference call, and we literally like stood up with our palms, high-fived each other because someone had repeated something that we had said. And we go into the meeting with the CEO later on, and we say, "Hey, Mal, this is great, but we need to continue focusing on head injuries." Pats on the back all around, because safety stats always improve. It's not always, but it's usually because of regression to the mean. So when you look at something that's bad, chances are, if you don't do anything about it, it will be better in 6 months or in a quarter, in 3 months. So you keep identifying these targets, and then you keep fixing them, and it looks like everything is working. Now, I want to go back, if you go back to the beginning of that story, and I stepped on it a little bit, but I said that was equivalent to the CEO saying, somebody somewhere fix this shit. So he tells it to the C-suite, and the C-suite tells the VPs, and the VPs tell the directors, and the directors tell the area managers, and the area managers tell the site managers, and the site managers tell the frontline supervisors, and the supervisors tell the worker bees. Somebody needs to fix this shit. Somebody needs to do something about this shit. They have no one to tell, so they go out and they do their best. And then they come at their, after action review, and they say, "Oh, I'm really proud of what we did, but somebody needs to do something about this shit." And it never gets fixed. And that's a caricature. There's value in all of it. There's value in the saying things with social currency. There's valuable in the communication. There's value in the engineering and the incentives and everything. It's just that when it's what everybody brings to the party, whatever's missing, somebody else has to do it. It's like, did you have potluck suppers over there? Do you call it that?
We do, under a different name.
Everybody brings a dish. Well, if you don't have a sign-up sheet, then everyone's going to bring beer, wine, cookies, Chex Mix, whatever they personally, are accustomed to shoving in their face when they're drinking. And then that's going to be your meal. If you want someone to bring, poached salmon, then you better make sure it's ahead of time. Yeah. And you as the host usually end up cooking meat and everything just so it will exist, or ordering at the last minute. So I don't want to completely disvalue that, but when I see that it's too much, the stress of the book is to take a highlighter and put it on everything that is social engineering that we do. So when we look to the end, we can see, look at what we've actually done for people, not sold them on or made it, but actually done. When I set to write a previous book, I got some books that existed, some popular nonfiction books, and I got 3 colors of highlighters, and I highlighted all the anecdotes and highlighted all the sort of salesmanship. And then, the one highlighter that never ran out is the one that actually has something to say. And I tried to get a grasp of what the right ratio is, because I want my book to sell as well as theirs. So what is the right ratio to get all of these things? I want to do that with our sort of corporate culture. So I want this book to be like the thing that the manager reads and says, we're not really doing things for people. And the person lower on the line looks up and says, he's right. If you did this for me, then I would be able to succeed a lot more often. I'd have a lot less misery in my job. And then there's the math.
Wow. There's so much in there I want to talk about. Firstly, I love that you keep using this term social engineering, which is a term I know from the world of hacking, which is a term that hackers use to extract passwords, information, not by a brute force technical means of getting into a system, but by engineering people. And, in some ways, it's a derogative term. It's in the hacker world, it's a form of con artistry. But here it seems like it's being used in a much more positive light and being used in almost a kind of, if I'm right in understanding, a mixture of psychology, behavioral science, reinforcement learning, maybe a little bit of carrot and stick as well. When you talk about behavioral engineering, is that what you mean? Is that what you're referring to? Totally.
And also, you're approaching it more as a scientific perspective. I think, and another part of it is that it really is a common language that we can all use to talk between industries and between levels in our industries. It's something that everybody understands. Mm-hmm. You can take your speech about, the puppy that you saw, whatever story, however it goes, and you can just take that around to wherever you like to take it and give that speech, and it'll have the same effect. And you have to have it. I mean, I wrote a blog. I love my blog. I used to put the address in my email signature. Every time I would meet with somebody, it would say, hey, check this out, look at this. It got a lot of response a lot of enthusiastic people read it, but they were people who were kind of already in that bandwagon anyway. And so they were just calling me up to pat me on the back and say, yeah, man, you really caught it. I'm really happy that you caught it. So, but you could read through the whole blog in 40 minutes. So then I write a book with some of the same information, and it takes hours to read a book. And I give out copies, and executives are reading it the first night I give it to them, calling me up, offering me employment. So I put something in a less attractive from a logistical standpoint format, and I get an audience that I never would have had before because I put in more of that social stuff. But it can't be all of that.
There's an interesting aspect of having credibility with a book, even if versus a blog. And they're both forms of written medium. They're both easily accessible. And even if the content is similar, there's something about saying, I have a published book, I think that still gives you credibility. If we're being honest from a business point of view and a client point of view here. What I really, really love about your book, as I said, I've spent a couple of weeks diving into this. And maybe you've just given me some insight in that it evolved from some of the blog work you've been doing. But what I really, really love about your book, Shay, is almost the slight unpredictable nature of it. There's a common theme here, around safety consultancy. But there's, chapters which are very, very pragmatic, bread on the table. This is how you do something. This is how you write a compliance report. This is how you can get better at doing X, Y, Z. This is how you phrase things in a clear and unambiguous manner. And then the next chapter might be on probability theory and delving into mathematics. And I think there's a little bit of coding in there as well, snippets of programming. And I just absolutely love this. And in a way, I mean this as a compliment. I hope it's taken as a compliment. But it reminds me a little bit of some of the books and magazines and e-zines from the kind of mid-90s era of the internet, where you would have people coming together and publishing these things around a common core topic. But it was a bit of a roller coaster going through it. You might have, again, I'll use my hacking background, which I was into in the 90s, but some of the hacker publications, 2600, one chapter might be pragmatic. This is how you hack Bell System telephone box. The next chapter might be a philosophical treatise on the morality of hacking. The next one will be, probability theory or network graph theory. And I really, really love that about your book, because there is a common theme. It's not totally random, but it delights you in that you don't know what the chapter is going to be, the next chapter is going to be about. So I really, really love the structure. And it's interesting that you say it's partially derived from some of the blog work you did.
Thank you. The math, when I started, the book was all going to be about math. I had this idea for a title, Information is Everything, Data is a 4-letter word, to try to put together the sort of thrust. Because, and I think this might be interesting to you because it has to do with what you and I share in common with the Incerto series of books by Nassim Taleb. And Nassim has two characters. One is Nero, who is a smart guy, very straight-laced, boring, by the book. The other is Fat Tony, and Fat Tony's the one we all idolize, right? Because Fat Tony is the practical thinker. He has the street smarts, but Fat Tony is wrong here. Mm-hmm. There used to be this concept. One of the smartest people that I know in high school told me that he knew how to win at roulette. You wait till it hits red twice and then you bet on black. He goes, what are the chances of hitting, red 3 times? Well, it's exactly the same as the chance of hitting red twice and then black. But it was just something that was in the sort of culture. We had this naive understanding of probability, and that's the way it expressed itself. There's even this canonical, if apocryphal, story of a exam question. You have a coin. You flip the coin 10 times in a row and get heads. What is the chance of hitting the coin, flipping the coin again and seeing another heads? In the canonical apocryphal textbook, the Nero answer is, well, the chance is 50-50, because every time you flip a coin, you have a 50-50 chance of hitting heads and tails, and the chance of hitting 10 heads in a row plus 1 tail is exactly equal to the chance of hitting 10 heads in a row plus a head. And then you had the Fat Tony answer. The Fat Tony is, in a sort of Tony Soprano accent, as well. No, if you flip a coin 10 times in a row and it hits heads, what are the chances of flipping the coin again and hitting heads? He says, 100%. because the coin is rigged, bada bing, bada boom, right? That's the Fat Tony answer. And that is the answer we needed 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
When it was written. That's what people needed to hear. But now we look at any scrap of data and assume that it's rigged. Assume that there's a thumb on the scale that we can find. So you go looking at whatever little bits or counts or charts are coming in through your company, and you say, okay, what pushed it? What made it look this way? When in reality, what usually looks like a 2 sigma or 3 sigma event isn't, right? You've left some things out that made it look that way. And even a 2 sigma event isn't that uncommon anyway. But we've built an entire industry off of this assumption that every game is rigged, that there's a thumb on every scale, and that we can use the numbers, pull out proof of it, and then go find it. Meanwhile, like I said, bad metrics always improve 100% of the time, not 100. Let's say 96, right? We use a number bell curve, improve, right? You have a 2 sigma event, it's going to improve 96% of the time. So it's a shell game where it seems like we're doing something. But I'm not the only one who's got this figured out, right? Everyone in IT knows this, right? All the people peddling all the software know this. A lot of the executives know this, but we keep doing it because the clients like it. There's even a line in the book. I think I made it a whole chapter about the golden rule, right? If someone else is paying for it, it's not a waste of time, So if you want me to come to your company, basically, and make this look as good as it can, then I'm happy to do that. And in reality, if you look at that, there is information in it. If you treat it as information and not data, there is a tremendous amount you can pull out. It's just that takes all the traditional things, operational knowledge and sophisticated understanding of what's going on that not everybody brings to the table. That's not part of that universal language to talk about information, but data is part of the language. So, and I summed up all those chapters now in 5 minutes. The point of reading them is to agree, is to be convinced by me, because I walk through to convince you and to convince.
It's fascinating, the idea. When I think of safety consultancy, I barely know the field, but I don't immediately start thinking of probability theory, mathematics, that kind of field. How did you come across using it? You mentioned blue collar background. Is this something that's purely been self-taught in different arenas and then you've integrated it into your field? Or is this more common than I think in your field?
No, it's personal interest from programming. Gave me a solid sort of background in probability. I read through textbooks, and then I always complained that back in the 90s on the internet you could get people's graduate theses for free. Now it's really hard to even pay for them. It's a kind of funny system. I don't know how they get by. It's too confusing for me. But so you could read the source papers for all of these things. So every time you saw an idea, you just go back to, well, who was the person who invented it? Now, most of that is modeling algorithms and spatial stuff and trigs. If you want to go back and you say, what is the winged edge algorithm? What is quicksort? What are all of these things? You can go back and read the first paper on them and have a really good understanding of them. So it was easier then. Eventually, I did take some credited courses from MIT to fill in any place that I hadn't thoroughly explored already, and also just to get the papers, to get the certificate. Just be pragmatic.
It's fascinating because to me, we talked about programming, talked about safety consultancy. I know you've had a few of the different careers from the conversations we've had. You're kind of like this Texan Renaissance man who's drilled together all of these separate threads and wove them into one focus. So this idea of safety consultancy. You mentioned earlier, one thing I want to come back to before we get too far away from it is, this idea of, again, I'm talking software terminology here, but this kind of waterfall style system of the CEO decides that, hand injury is important. He delegates it to the board, they delegate it, and you get this waterfall style of delegation down to the shop floor. And to what extent in your career, in your field, is there a genuine desire for change through that method? Or to what extent is it, okay, we want to add another chapter to our, 4,000-page document, and then the onus is on the people on the shop floor to read it. And if they have an accident and they haven't read it, then tough. To what extent is it we want to cover ourselves from a legal corporate point of view versus legitimately make cultural change?
Well, most of the culture is there already because a lot of people believe this. But it's really difficult to communicate it and to get it out there and make it happen until you reach an event. I'll get to that in just a second. I want to bring up a Texas saying. I think it's a Texas saying: "Is dance with him what brung you." I mean, remember who and what got you there. And so a lot of times when people are speaking this way, and we are as a society are maybe maturing about what our expectations are, they still have to speak in the lingua franca of safety management, which is war stories and, heartfelt things and Jocko Willink. And like I said, all that stuff is great. It doesn't cover all the bases. So another piece of it is, what they do is they want to build teams, allocate resources. That's another step. When that isn't done right, it can look like cargo culting, but the impetus is there. The desire is there. I say cargo culting. If I've been parts of this and I've seen other really senior frontline personnel be a part of this too. The management teams realize that they don't have any operational knowledge. If you look at things that changed since I was in the oil industry in 2005, we have our management looks a lot more like the world at large. That's been a big push, but it looks a lot less like the company at large. So that as you do that. Now I'm not speaking for or against that concept and the ideas that it brings. Everything has benefits and everything has challenges. The point is, if you don't recognize and accept and address the challenges, then a trade term that we use is you pay back in blood, meaning literally, you're going to kill people if you don't recognize what's changed. So people get that, right? People are smart. They get that and they bring in some field personnel and they say, okay, now help us contribute to this and build something that's like more technically savvy. But it doesn't usually work because those personnel have to build something and pitch it and succeed and thrive in the same culture that excluded them from management in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So unless they can just repeat what the managers say, then their ideas aren't going to be heard. And they can come up with the best idea. If it's so culturally irrelevant as to sound like a non sequitur, it will be treated like a non sequitur. It'll be spoken and then, okay, well, that's nice. I see our hand injuries are down from last quarter. Now it's back injuries. Okay, we really need to focus on eliminating back injuries. So everybody wants to do it. It's just sort of figuring out a way to do it in pieces to do it. I just had, over the past couple of years, a tremendous opportunity to work with a company that was transitioning to not one, but two computer-based sort of process systems. So you put things in the computer-based process system and you have a development team that helps you and they say they're going to help you get it in there. But then they come back to you and say, well, we can't put this in there. This doesn't agree with this. Or, well, you never said how we're supposed to do this. There's all of these pieces missing. It's a big mess. And, all of that, all this complexity is hiding in it. There is no sort of button on our dashboard for, well, we sort of do that in big projects, but not in small projects. And you have to use your best judgment. I mean, come on, common sense, right? There's nothing to click for that. So this company was really motivated to get all of their stuff in there. And then they just ran into me at the right time. And I went in and I took their management system and I made it into things the computer would understand. And the human beings are opening it up and saying, my goodness, this is the first time I've actually understood exactly what I'm supposed to do. And also there were a few times they said, well, it doesn't say this that I always thought I had to do. So now I can release myself from that burden. And when it says to do something, it has a name or a position on it. So I know it's not just me again, me again, me again. So no, it's really not hard to find people who want to. It's the difficulty is convincing them that what they're doing right now isn't doing that. So bringing the people in from the field, that's a part, it's a good part, but it's not that. Training, because when you open up the training, it's just more social engineering. So it's just that, right? More technical manuals, more, what I said yesterday, there's too much documentation on the internet, not enough instruction. So more documents, more footnotes, more putting our head together, more meetings, none of that provides clarity. You have a meeting and every person in the room will tell you something else they want to add and then to a document that they've never read. So it's sort of an abstract idea. I don't know if you've ever taken one of these books, like, because it's not just the producers who feel this way. All of us feel this way. You ever taken one of those books like The 4-Hour Work Week or From Zero to One, or, if you want to go way back, it would be Think and Grow Rich or something. And you sit down and you say, one of these days, I'm going to get a weekend. We'll go through this book and then I'm going to be rich. So you get out the book and you read it and you're so convinced that all the answers are there, right? You have been socially engineered. So you open up the book and you say, oh, all right, chapter introduction. Let's go through the introduction. The secret to having everything you want, independence, wealth, and happiness, is in your hands. Okay. Better write that down. In my hands. All right. Yeah. Second paragraph. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't have your dreams. Okay. Silence the haters. And you write that out and you get to the introduction and say, well, okay, wasn't really anything there. Let's go to chapter 1. Chapter 1. I was having lunch in Vail with one of my, Vail is one of the richest places to vacation in the U.S., Vail, Colorado. I was having lunch in Vail with my friend from college who happens to own 17 warehouses producing widget number 16. And what do you know? We ran into his ex-girlfriend, who is a vice president in charge of maintenance at Delta Airlines. And she tells us that Delta Airlines is in a panic because widget number 17, they lost their manufacturer. So I got to thinking, well, here we are with all of these factories, and here we are with this need. Maybe we can take the existing, and you're taking, leverage rich friends, vacation in Vail, right? You're writing all of this stuff down. Okay, well, that's chapter 2, and you take some notes. Okay, invest in unicorns. Always want to invest in, unicorn companies. Anybody don't know that word? A unicorn company is, one of these rare companies that goes from someone's garage to being a multi-billion-dollar thing and everyone remotely attached to it. Okay, well, and 3, network, buy a yacht. And so you get to the end of it and you realize you were so convinced there was nothing in it. I see something tragic to change stories for a little bit. I see younger people in my life throwing their professional prospects away because of Plan Bism. It's like, okay, I need to realize I'm in a dead-end job and I'm not really doing my best at that job anyway. I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot every day. I don't want to get out of bed on Monday morning. I show up 20 minutes, but that's okay because, as soon as I get the litter box cleaned out, I'm going to go start my YouTube channel, right? Or become a social media, whenever, program an app. Man, when we had our layoffs, I went through a merger. We had lots of layoffs, and too many people are walking out the door. It's like, okay, this is cool. I got 6 months severance, and I took a 2-hour online Python course, and here we go. Here's the app, right? I'm going to go build my app. Everything is going to be cool. Or I'm going to start a certain kind of business, or I'm going to buy a franchise opportunity. It's because we have been socially engineered into believing that all of that stuff works. Mm-hmm. And the people who write it, of course, know how to get rich. They're rich, right? So they did something right. I'm not going to believe it's all luck, but they think they wrote it down in the book. They think they've shared it. They haven't shared anything.
Well, these people, we're going into a complete tangent here that, those type of books are a pet hate of mine. And I'm actually in the process of writing an essay about this kind of, I call it self-circularity. I get rich by writing a book on how to get rich. Or, and it's always either health or wealth. These are two long-standing human dreams. And, to an extent, they self-hold dream. But I don't want to go off on too much of a rant about that. I think it's really interesting what you were saying about the digital transformation stuff and the converting human process into digital being tricky. Now, again, that's something that is my field of expertise, really my day job. And it's amazing how often we get this wrong and continue to get things like this wrong. And there's a fascinating case study, not from work I did, but one I know of on the London Underground, the subway network in London. And they were hired to monitor the control room, safety control room. They want to digitize a lot of these human processes. So they went ahead and built their software, and it wasn't working. It just didn't quite capture it. So instead, what they did, which I thought was really good, is before they wrote another line of code, they put some not hidden, but inconspicuous cameras in the control room and just watched what the human process was for a couple of weeks. And what they actually found out is one of the key things that they hadn't modeled, even when they sat down and asked people about the process, was there was one person responsible for one stage of some safety control process, and the other person was on the desk directly behind them. And they were meant to go through, this system and procedure. But in reality, all they would do, quicker and easier, was turn around, swivel their chairs, and have that conversation that way. And that's completely missed in the digital modeling, that core component. And I think this is something that's endemic. I think it's incredibly difficult to do, though. I'm not saying that people who miss this, are incompetent. It's just incredibly difficult to model human behavior. And that's why we have accidents, industrial accidents. If this stuff was easy, there would be a found solution to this problem. It's interesting, I think, as well, about some of the stuff you wrote in your book. I call it almost like frog in the boiler effect. But there's one guy, I think it was like a parable or analogy. Was it Timothy Treadwell, the bear guy?
Yeah.
So this is a guy who, I think it was either the Alaskan or Canadian wilderness, who's going out, befriending these bears month after month, year after year, got confident enough that he brought his fiancée along. And of course, inevitably, down the line, something went wrong and he was eaten by them. And this reminds me a little bit of Taleb's turkey problem. This concept of if a turkey is fed every day, he thinks it's safe, and one day it's Thanksgiving and they're axed. Is this something you see a parable of that a lot in your profession, where the illusion of safety, either just because certain events are rare enough that people forget they happen, or going back to the cargo cultism slightly, people think the procedures are keeping them safe, but really it's just the unlikely probability that's keeping them safe, and the procedures aren't actually having that much effect?
Yes. I don't think it's as big a problem maybe as it's sold to be, because we've gotten so far past like existential threats when we talk about safety. With, we came out a few years ago, society came out with injectable antibiotics. So anytime you get an injection, you have a recordable incident. Well, all the rules changed. We started wearing more personal protective equipment, thicker gloves, to prevent injuries that you wouldn't consider an injury when you are when you're at home. So fear is kind of a non-starter, because I think it's not, the chance of something really bad happening to you is actually so low that people don't go feeling their death. Now, they take stupid risks, things that they would be terrified to see that they did on camera. It would scare the heck out of them. But I think that's more due to having too much responsibility at one time, distraction, than it is to this sort of bravado built up over the years of, well, I survived that. That's kind of a caricature that I don't really know exists anymore. I think everybody at this point, everybody in the field looks at things through a compliance mindset more than they look through things as a fear mindset. Because I also told the story in the book about the Leventhal study, and I'll just go really shortly through that one, is that, they tried scaring people and didn't get an effect. And when they scared and instructed people, they got an effect. So that was the Leventhal tetanus study. More interested in the what I call the Treadwell effect, and how you can use it for yourself. And this is how it's different than the turkey study. If you are uncomfortable with something, then you just go and you do it multiple times until you get comfortable with it. So if you are not accustomed to getting in conversations where you have to confront somebody, you just do it until you get comfortable. If you're not comfortable with public speaking, well, you just do it until you get comfortable. And the Treadwell effect is an example of how that will work. But you've really sort of stepped on or hit on a big difference that we talk about between sort of corporate people and or management personnel and field personnel, is that field personnel really aren't aren't scared, and there's not a lot you can do to make them scared. You can't take a person who this is oil field, but goes home, gets on his four-wheeler with a AR-15 and a 30-pack of beer and goes out to the woods with friends, to shoot wild hogs and tracer rounds. You're not going to make that person scared of a bench grinder. It's a non-starter, right? You can make them respect it, and you can make them use it a certain way at work. And everyone's got a story about how something scared them at work, or somebody said something that hit home and they went home and changed what they did. But I think that's the exception rather than the rule.
I think you also see these kind of urban legends. Everybody who's ever worked in perhaps a non-office workplace has heard these urban legends that get passed down of like, oh, so-and-so did this once and it, I don't know, ripped his arm off. I've got a friend who's a zookeeper, and she has a number of these urban legends, and I challenged her on them. I was like, well, do you actually know any of these people? It's like, oh no, it was before I worked here. So I think they're good in a way. There's a very human kind of storytelling aspect to that. And in many ways, that might be a more effective way of enforcing might be the wrong word, but soliciting compliance than, some dry guidebook or rule book.
The incidents, at least in industries I've been around, are actually real. I mean, fortunately, I've watched the videos. But, the question is, it's really more about what you do about it and how hard that is. Something I tell when I'm in do risk assessment class a lot is I talk about my son when he was 2 years old or younger, and I put him in the car seat in the car, and I go to close the door. I'm terrified that he's going to reach out and put his arm into the door, right? Or try to stop it. It could break a little kid's arm. Just trying to stop it. He wants to tell me something, or he doesn't want to close it. He's just being stubborn, or to stick his legs out in the door. As his legs got longer and he's in that seat, it would terrify me. But the answer wasn't to try to terrify. I mean, that's one thing I could have done. Now, Oliver, if you look here, if you put your arm, it'll be crushed off. Now, here's a picture of someone's arm who was crushed off. Or remember that guy we saw at the mall and he had a hook hand? Well, probably when he was your age, he reached out, that is something to do. But what I told him was, cross your feet and put your hands on top of your head. So when I would close the door, he'd cross his feet and put his hands on top of his head. When I would close the trunk, I'd say, put your hands on top of your head. So this is the fix, but the fix is really tough. I mean, it really takes looking at things and figuring it out. That's why I can't go over to wherever you work and tell people, cross your feet and put your hands on top of your head. It only works here, right? Like if you're swimming, that's probably a bad idea.
It's interesting what you say about the fear aspect. I think that can backfire as well. There's a famous story about the first, again, this is London Underground again. We keep coming back to this, but going back to the late Victorian era, the world's first wooden escalator and mechanical stairs was installed in one of the stations. And people were terrified of using it. And they were thinking, well, how can we get compliance? How can we encourage people, social engineer people to use these automatic steps? And they were said, I know, we'll hire a guy with a wooden peg leg to go up and down all day to show how easy it is. Even a guy with one leg can use these stairs. It's so easy. And it completely backfired because people were absolutely terrified of them because they thought these stairs have ripped this guy's leg off. So I think there's an instance where fear can almost they didn't try to use fear, the opposite, but it ended up happening anyway. You were talking about, the hands on the head thing. There are a whole variety of reasons why certain things like this might be difficult to establish culturally. But do you find once they are ingrained, they tend to propagate and stay, or is there a kind of half-life to them? Do they require topping up through intervention, or can they kind of become self-sustaining? People almost, pass it down through worker to worker, and they do it without even quite realizing why they're doing it.
I think it can be sustained if you don't put it in what's hard to sustain is when you have a mandate or you have an idea, but you don't fund it, meaning you don't give it time, you don't give it resources, or you make no allowances for the people who are trying to do it. Then that's what makes it hard. If I say as a habit, we rolled out this new process, I want you to get it, and I want you to review the process every day. Well, then people will go in, they'll review it for a few days because they were told to, and everybody wants to succeed and do the things that they're asked to do. Want to do that. I say in the book, I know of people who have literally died trying to do a good job. So to say that someone is lazy or unmotivated, call that into question, right? You're trying to please your boss and you literally die. So that's going to be hard to maintain. Now, if we say we're going to give you 10 minutes and this is the chair you sit in. So everybody every day is going to sit in this chair for 10 minutes and there's no talking in this room. And we're going to put this piece of paper in front of you. So we've given you everything. I'm paying the check for this. I am paying for you to sit here for 10 minutes to do this. And then you set up the place. And it's not even good enough to say that you're paying for it, because we use that argument all the time. We're paying you to do this. We're paying you to go through this process. Why don't you do it? Well, the process is confusing and stressful and miserable, always wrong no matter what I do, and so tired of failing that I can't even stomach trying that again. I don't care if you pay me. You just keep your money and I'll stay in bed another 10 minutes. But when you really, when you tell everybody everything they need to do, the path to success for this, and to do that, you have to take away other things, right? So you can't have everything in your culture. You can't have last week's and this week's and next week's. You find the best thing and then you have to stick with it until you find something better, and then you have to take it off the table. What I mentioned on my website, what I mentioned in my blog, what I mentioned in my book, what I mentioned to everybody that I talk to about management systems is counting in Gatsby's. Your favorite book, Sebastian doesn't like this book, The Great Gatsby, is less than 50,000 words. 50,000 words at 100 words a minute for a technical reading speed is 500 minutes. Mm-hmm. 500 minutes is now got to do the math. What is that, 8 hours and change? So for every 50,000 words you publish or promulgate is the word they use, you've got to allow 8 hours for everyone to read it once. Mm-hmm. One time, right? So like having a meeting and telling everyone they need to read it and how important it is. And, oh, no, it's okay because we arranged it so you can see difference. The people who write it have read it once, maybe twice, right? The people who signed off on it didn't read it at all. I went through we put together an orientation video for a company I was working for. They distributed it to everybody and their cousin to review it. Now, the video was 15 minutes. The company is 3,000 people. So if all 3,000 people write it, I'm not going to try to do that math right now, but it's a lot of people we expect to watch this video, right? Everyone who comes on is going to watch this video, and some are going to watch it more than once. This is a huge monetary investment. And this isn't a maybe. When you go out to a facility, you sit down on a couch and you watch this video. It's going to happen, right? I might have been the only one who watched the video. It was a mess, right? All kinds of things in there that would be embarrassing for the company. We had to rewrite the video. So maybe I wasn't the only one. Maybe it was 3 of us. Maybe it was 4 of us. I mean, the point is, we're not willing. What we're asking of people is so great that we're not willing to do it ourselves. And if you want to get to cross your feet and hands on your heads, you're going to have to give a whole lot of time for that to be communicated and shared and identified. It's another problem with people on the bottom doing everything. How many you ever written something really clever in code and then you find it years later and you're like, man, somebody patented that. Like if I just known about that, right? I'd have saved myself hours of head scratching and, I got to feel proud for a few years. But basically, and that tool was right in the box. I just didn't see it because it's buried in with all these other things. So yeah, I mean, I think we have some great things in our culture that are consistent and approved and we go through. For instance, you go out to a industrial work site and almost everybody eats lunch. You go into an office and that's not the case. We work through lunch for free. Mm-hmm. It's a bad part of our culture. We work for lunch for free because, 3 weeks ago, we took a phone call on company time and now we sort of feel that we're in production deficit and we've got to pay it back for the whole rest of our lives. Right.
There's an aura of repentance there almost. I think it's interesting what you're saying about the training. That really resonates from me. A lot of the client work I do is in financial services and banking. And there is a huge amount of compliance training, even for contractors, consultants, that have to be done on a regular basis. And, this training is boring. Nobody wants to do it. But what really puts you off at someone having to be forced to do this is the sheer low effort that goes into a lot of it. You're doing this and it's some crappy PowerPoint thing that somebody's thrown together really badly. Half the buttons don't even work. It's a terrible user experience. The videos are really cheesy. And, you're not even reading it. I might be outing myself here, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. You're just like clicking next as fast as you can and just getting to the exam at the end because you can probably guess and pass with a high enough percentage rate. And I have absorbed approximately 0 from most of these training sessions. We can laugh about it. A lot of this is to do with financial crime and money laundering. So there isn't anyone's life on stake here. This isn't going to lead to an industrial accident. But I do feel that's a common occurrence, across multiple different industries. And this is where I think we can learn a lot from people like Rory Sutherland, behavioral science, really learn things from web designers, learn things from advertising agencies about, compliance, attention, how to really ingrain things in. Like we were saying earlier, it's not necessarily just through showing grisly photographs or trying to scare people, because some kind of people just aren't going to get scared. It's not necessarily taking the completely logical approach either. There might be interventions which are incredibly simple, cheap interventions, which could have enormous impacts in the way people behave and comply to a certain safety standard. And I'm just curious, if you've ever considered behavioral science or if you indeed have any examples of using that kind of stuff in your field.
No, I don't. I do not have background in behavioral science where I can talk about it in a sort of cogent way. Only say I limit I know Kahneman, right? So I know sales science, I know behavioral science in that way and things that I've exposed to that way. But most of my approach is that I know what makes people so miserable that they can't function or think, because I've experienced it and I've done it. And I know when I'm doing something that's going to make people just horrified and miserable and bring them to the point where they can't go on. I think, I'm not a professional programmer. I was for a few months. I think I could, right? I've done it. I've done it for decades. But I am always someone, I do code a lot. I do technical stuff, set things, you're like, I play that role, right, in the company. So if you're sitting in any general floor, I would probably be the one to ask about anything of that. When something just really kicks my butt, something technical, some piece of documentation, it's bad documentation. Also, I can find sometimes just joy in really miserable situations. And I can accept a lot of criticism and a lot of yelling and a lot of heat and a lot of hard work and a lot of misery, right? And a lot of impossible expectations and a lot of people being disappointed with me and being on the runoff list. And I can accept all of these things. If something is really getting to me, that's bad. You have absolutely psychologically crushed almost everybody out there. So that's my sort of behavioral science metric, or as deep as I can go with it. Don't do things that make.
I love that. I love that. If we're going to call this like the Shay threshold, if something is so bad, if your documentation, procedures, training is so bad that Shay Hill finds it painful, you're doing something wrong. We're coming up now to the end of our hour. Unfortunately, these things always go so unbelievably quickly, and it's always a real shame when we have to end them, because there's so much more I wanted to talk to you about. But we'll definitely try and maybe get you on for a part 2 in the future. I just want to ask, while we've got a few minutes left, is there anything you wanted to mention, go over? I'd love for you to, tell our listeners where people can reach you, where they can find you. We're going to post a link to Shay's blog and his book as well in the comments of everywhere we distribute this. But I almost want to call it Jerry Springer's final thoughts, but anything you want to say?
Well, the scale of my career is such that I think the best way to contact me right now is you can call me on my telephone. And Sebastian, you can put the telephone number up there, put my email address up there, and just reach out and we'll talk.
Awesome. I will do. That's incredibly gracious of you. I'm going to have to add a legal disclaimer that I accept no responsibility for the people that call you on your private line. Shay, thank you so much. I definitely want to get you back in future. I think there's so much more to talk about. We've barely scratched the surface here. But thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun, Sebastian. Thanks.